Good morning and welcome back to Staying Connected. This is Katie Wright, your host, and today I have a special guest with me, Dr. Peter Byers, who's going to talk about his experience with vascular Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. Peter, you've been a very special person among the community for a while, so why don't you tell us who you are?
Thanks. Well, I'm Peter Byers. I'm a medical geneticist at the University of Washington in Seattle, and have been involved with the vascular Ehlers-Danlos community, and ever since it was Ehlers-Danlos syndrome type 4, since the mid-1970s.
So how did that come about? Like, how did you guys discover that there was an Ehlers-Danlos syndrome type 4?
Well, it wasn't us. The condition was first described actually in the 1930s by George Sack, and it was called status dysvascularis to begin with.
Dysvascularis?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then in the 1960s, a British surgeon identified a set of people who seemed as if they had a form of Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. And he thought it was distinct, wrote a paper about it. And he was, his last name was Barabbas. And so for a while, this was called Sack-Barabbas syndrome.
Okay.
And then Peter Byton included it in his...
Like as the Byton scale?
As the Byton scale,
okay.
Right. In a review of 100 or so people with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome in the United Kingdom that he had studied, and called it a distinct form, and it became known then as the type 4, because there was a severe, what's now called classic form, and then a milder form, and then hypermobility, and then this form. And there was a fifth form at that time that just kind of disappeared. But I was in the last medical school class that was going to be drafted for the Vietnam War as a physician. But there were alternative services for us, and one of them was at the NIH in the Public Health Service. And I ended up in a laboratory headed by George Martin that was studying collagens and collagen biology and collagen synthesis. And during the time that I was there for 3 years, there were 3 medical genetics fellows who were at Johns Hopkins that Victor McCusick sent down to study the basis of inherited connective tissue disorders that he was interested in. They each brought cell strains, fibroblasts that had been grown from people. So Jack Lichtenstein came down and brought tissue from somebody that has turned out to have what became known as Ehlers-Danlos type 7.
Which one is that?
Well, he thought it was a dermatosporactic form at the time, but it actually was the arthrochalasis type.
Okay.
And Mike Sussman, who was an orthopedic surgeon, brought cells from somebody who turned out to have type 6, or the kyphoscoliotic form. And then Mike Pope, who, when he finished his fellowship, went back to England and established a whole Ehlers-Danlos community there. He brought cells from a young man that had this type 4 and studied it, and they were the ones that identified or determined that there was an abnormality in the production of type 3 collagen. So I left there after 3 years and had all of this in mind, went to the University of Washington as a fellow in medical genetics and also in biochemistry, and started seeing patients who had this. And the first person I saw was actually in Vancouver, BC.
BC?
Yeah. And we grew skin cells from her fibroblast, and then studied the amount of type 3 collagen. And then a colleague, Karen Holbrook, who is a cell biologist and electron microscopist, did electron microscopy in the skin, and it was very dramatic because cells in the skin fibroblasts, had huge inclusions in them.
What are inclusions?
Inclusions means that there was material that should have been outside the cell or should have been destroyed, but was accumulating inside the cell in the secretory pathway. And type 3 collagen is ordinarily made inside the cell.
Okay.
And there was stuff accumulating. And when we grew the cells in culture and we looked at the type 3 collagen, we discovered that her cells, when they were cultured, accumulated type 3 collagen inside the cells and had a secretory defect, and so there was much less outside the cells. And so we could see that this was all part and parcel of what was going on. And then gradually, over time, we began to see people in there, and people began sending us cells. I was studying osteogenesis imperfecta and these other conditions at the same time. We were using electron microscopy, Karen was doing, as a tool to look at the structure of collagens in the skin and also cells and what was happening. We did it for all the different people, and we could find alterations. And then there were some people who had clinically what was Ehlers-Danlos type 4, now vascular EDS, who didn't have nearly as much storage, and they had other kinds of alterations. But we could still see abnormalities in the collagens when they were made. So we continued that on.
Yeah.
We worked together for almost 15 years, and she left to be first the dean of the graduate school and vice president for research at the University of Florida, went to become the provost at the University of Georgia, and then became the president of Ohio State University. And we're still in touch, but after many years.
And you're still at UW?
I'm still at the University
in
of Washington.
Seattle.
Yeah, I've been there since 1974.
And you've been seeing patients with vascular Ehlers-Danlos syndrome since the 1970s.
Right. So we did that. When I finished my fellowship, I ended up with a faculty position in the Department of Pathology, and then also in medicine. In medicine, I was seeing patients in our genetics clinic. But in pathology, I started a research lab, and the research was on trying to identify the underlying bases of the different forms of connective tissue disorders, but primarily forms of Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, and also of osteogenesis imperfecta. And the person in whose lab I ended up there for a while sort of saw what I was doing, and he said, people will pay you to do this.
Were you doing it for free?
Yeah, we were doing it as part of research studies. And so we set up a diagnostic laboratory. And that started in the late 1970s, early 1980s, and had gradually increased the number of samples that we saw. We were studying using fibroblasts almost all the time, so people had to have skin biopsies, and then the cells were grown from that, and then sent, and then we studied those.
So when was the major switch from the skin biopsy to like a blood test or a saliva test?
All right, so we used the cells to look at the proteins, and then we could extract the messenger RNA from the cells and sequence that. And that continued as the predominant way of doing things until the early to mid 1990s. And the first sequencing papers for these conditions were done in the early 1980s, but it was a more cumbersome thing. The sequencing was done by hand. And then the automated sequencers became available, and that changed the course of things. And then beginning in the late 2000s, the switch was from standard sequencing one by one to next generation sequencing, which could sequence huge numbers of genes, in fact, the genome. And so that was the switch that happened then. So that's now close to a decade old. And we made the switch gradually over time from the more standard kinds of sequencing to the next generation sequencing.
So were there people who were tested on a skin biopsy that ended up being retested with a blood test?
Yeah. So it became easier to extract. Became easier to extract DNA from blood and then sequence the genes from there. And but in the collection of people that we had, we actually went back to the fibroblasts, extracted the RNA from them, and sequenced that for all but about 30 or 40 of the people that we had studied who had protein abnormalities. So there's a small set of the people, I think we still have frozen cells from them, where we didn't do the sequencing from things that we started in the early to mid-1980s.
Wow.
But now it's easier, instead of thawing them and growing the cells and collecting the RNA, just to get blood from people. So of course some of those people are no longer alive, but if they're family members, then we can study family members.
So you and Shireen have both been very involved in the community and like the vEDS collaborative and everything that you're doing, and you're very communicative for doctors, like comparatively to what I've experienced. So was it always like that for you, being so involved in patients' lives?
Yes. I'm a medical geneticist, and so when we see people, we see families. We spend, our visits in the clinic are at least an hour long. We spend our time explaining sort of the esoterica of biology to people, and so we have to develop a way to talk about things in a way that I think is a little simpler. I'm never sure when I talk. But we followed people. The people I saw in the clinic, we followed, and we would see people yearly, and we would see new family members and study the extended family. So it really became part of what we did. And with vascular EDS, I certainly became involved enough with families that I went to funerals. Participated in all the different kinds of things in people's lives. And I think it was because there were not a lot of physicians who understood the nature of the condition. And so I became the central point for people and would talk to their doctors and talk to them and talk to family members. And it was just sort of the natural thing to do. I went to medical school to become a psychiatrist.
Really?
Yeah. And changed course very quickly because psychiatry at the time was either Freudian psychiatry or used shock therapy. And I knew I wasn't going to do very well in either one of those. And sort of wandered, and I was interested first in how does our body tell the difference between self and non-self, so the immunologic kinds of things. And so it never ended up in a laboratory that did that, but by chance happened into this laboratory at the NIH that was studying these rare conditions, and then realized, oh, that's interesting. And what I was interested in was that I thought that if you looked at advances in genetics and in biology, it was from studying organisms, often bacteria, sometimes larger animals, that had mutations, and that you could infer the functions of proteins. You could see how things worked by studying the ones that had alterations in them or abnormalities. And I thought that was something that we would gather from studying people who had these things. And I think that was correct, and that we've learned not only a lot about the conditions, but also about the biology of the molecules, and about fundamental genetic aspects of things and all kinds of stuff like that. So I think all of that worked out, but a part of it was, I enjoy talking to people. And if you get people who work in laboratories and do stuff, the science is great, but it's talking about it that really makes a difference. And so that was sort of the natural outcome of doing this.
Thank you for talking to me at 6:30 in the morning.
You're welcome. You can hear the hotel coming to life as the air conditioning comes on and things like that.
Yeah, we're at the Marfan Foundation annual conference in Stole, one of the little rooms at 6:30 in the morning.
Right, in Houston.
Hilarious.
And we're inside because it's 100 degrees outside.
Thank you for doing that.
You're welcome.
So you mentioned how you've been involved with families and gone to funerals.
So, and you had asked about Shireen. And Shireen was trained as a surgeon at the University of Washington. She was very interested in unusual aspects and became interested in genetic aspects of vascular disease. And I met her while she was still a fellow, and we negotiated, and because she wanted to stay and be involved with laboratory stuff and do all that sort of stuff. And but rather than staying, because it was some kind of strange communication thing that happened primarily between her and the head of vascular surgery there, I think. She ended up coming to Houston for a year, worked here with Diana Milowitz and the vascular surgeons, and then I think realized that Houston was not the place for her to stay, the weather being at least one of the factors, and other things happened as well. And so she arranged to come back to Seattle, and we reconnected then, and that's now several years ago, and she's really been the driving force in in getting a lot of this stuff going, and it's her energy and enthusiasm and the nobody's going to stop me kind of attitude that complements my slightly more laid back aspect of things, and really puts it together. And so
you guys make a wonderful team.
We work together, and and I see patients with her, and so we see people who have other kinds of genetic vascular diseases, and it's been a wonderful working partnership. Really, it's really, I've learned a lot. She tells me she's learned a lot, so it's been great. And it's interesting because I think we have a lot of the same style in terms of what we do when we see people in our clinics, and it extends. For both of us, it extends outside the clinic, so that's been one of the things.
Yeah, that was a big change when I met you guys. I was afraid. I know the first couple times I was like, well, she gave me her number, but I don't know if I should really use it. I don't want to be a burden. But then every time that I call you guys, it's just like,
we answer our own phones.
Yeah, you answer your own phones, and she's called the hospital for me.
But we're not going to leave our phone numbers here, right?
No. No. But you guys have really been great. So, what are the good and the bad things that you've experienced being so involved in people's lives?
Well, the good things are, I think that I think people really appreciate the idea that we're willing to spend time and talking with people and make time and try to make sure that people understand what's happening. And I think we have the ability to see the long term and how things play out in the long term with people, and can talk about things and feel comfortable in talking about the complications of vascular EDS and what we do to make it different, and how we try and anticipate what's going on, which is often a difficult transition for people to make. That is to become aware of what's available in the community, and to sort of take charge of what's ahead for them. And this is how you work, but it isn't true for everybody.
Right.
But sort of shepherding people through that process has been really very gratifying, and it's always striking how much people appreciate what we do. And it's funny because it's one of those things where I don't think either of us thinks we're doing something special. We're just doing what we do. And yet to have people say, wow, this is really great. There's not very much that's like that in the world. And having constant appreciation for the kinds of things we do is really an enormous return that I don't think either one of us anticipated. Surgeons get that because they do things to people, and geneticists talk to people and explain stuff. And I don't always realize how different that is. It was one of these things that was peculiar about 15 years or so. When we were finished, people would leave the room. This is in the genetics clinic.
Yeah.
And as they left, they would say, "Thank you for your time." I thought that was really strange because, they're paying for the time. But I realized that they were seeing somebody who understood what they had, knew a fair amount about it, and was just willing to sit and talk and listen. And the listening is probably the most important part of what it is.
Yeah.
And to deal with the anxieties and, find ways through it and do all of those kinds of things. So all of those, those are the really very satisfying things about it. And I think the most difficult part is we lose people. And, we are part of, for many people, we're part of the family in a sense, because we know everybody in the family. And, that's not an easy part of it. And we know that it will happen, and it's gird our loins and sort of go on. But by being part of that process as well, and being there when the family is going through the grief that we share, it again is one of the things that sort of is part of what we do, and it's part of what makes this a human effort. So,
I like that, human effort. It is, I remember asking Shireen about that, I think it was, maybe almost a year ago. I said, how do you do this?
Yeah.
Like, how do you, because I was really starting to get more connected in the community, and then I would see things, and I asked her one day, I'm like, how, because you guys are like family to me now. Like it's over. You're already family. It's done.
Right.
You can't do anything about it. But sorry.
Well, we realize that. I certainly realize it, and I think Shireen does as well.
Yeah. So I remember asking her, I'm like, how is it for you when you lose someone? And she's like, it's like losing family.
Right.
And I'm so appreciative of you guys continuing to do this for us. And I know you get a good amount of appreciation from it, from everybody, but I don't know if you really can understand how much it means to us.
I think we do. I think that it's...
I hope so. Right. Like words just can't express it enough. So.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome. I don't know what else to ask you, because I've just had an emotional moment.
Well, you can rest for a while, and then we can think about it. Drink a cup of coffee, right? Especially made in the hotel.
Well, that was pretty funny. I could tell people about that.
Yeah.
I woke up at like 4:45, and I thought that there wasn't a coffee maker in my room, which I thought was a very cruel joke. And so I went down to the hotel lobby, and I said, hey, I need some coffee. And they're like, well, nothing opens till 7. I'm like, 7? I cannot wait until 7 o'clock for coffee. That's insane. What do you guys?
Right.
So there should be one in your room. I'm like, no, there's really not one in my room. So I'm like halfway on a walk,
Right.
half a mile down the street to Starbucks, and I'm texting Peter, and Peter's like, there's a coffee maker in your room. It's in the drawer under the TV. I'm like, why would it be there?
Right, exactly. That's what I thought when I found mine.
So I turned around and came back. So it was a pretty funny morning, but makes for a very early morning.
I think that, this community is a very tight community in ways that are hard to see, and you sometimes don't see it. And so, from both of our perspectives, I think, that the community has arisen in part because people do experience losses.
Yeah.
And I think that, Kathy Bowen has been an integral part in bringing the communities together, and she and other moms who had lost their kids really were devoted to the idea that they would be able to do something that would somehow, someday, result in making sure that these kinds of things didn't happen. I mean, or that it would happen when everybody in the community was appropriately aged. And that kind of work is beginning to come to fruition. And I think that it's really the remarkable efforts, and it's a network that people in the community know about, and it's you don't always refer to people who have these rare conditions as being a community.
Yeah.
But it's an online community, it's an in-person community, it's people visit, people talk. I think it's changed with social media.
The Facebook things.
The Facebook things. That Kathy's going to show me about later
Is that
later
what you
this
guys
morning.
repeated?
Yeah. Over breakfast, she's going to show me the Facebook page.
Oh my gosh.
And so, because I made her promise that she would do that, because I was looking at the website as part of looking at the websites for all the members of the collaborative that Shireen has been instrumental in putting together. And I thought that this website needs a little buffing. And so I said that to her, and she said, "Oh yeah, we really don't use it very much. There's just enough information to get to the Facebook page, and then the Facebook page is where everything happens."
Yes.
So, since I don't have a Facebook account,
or Twitter, the Facebook page has been. There's a Facebook group like specifically for people with genetically confirmed vEDS, and it's been amazing.
Yeah.
I don't remember who grabbed me and put me in that. It might have been Emily Ranta, like back when I was first diagnosed. Because I remember posting in like the Ehlers-Danlos forum, like I was just diagnosed with vascular type, and then she messaged me.
Oh, interesting.
Or I think that was when I was still, I wasn't diagnosed yet. I was still in my 4-month
right,
mission.
in the Odyssey.
Just to get it.
Try and find it.
And then after I got confirmed, somebody put me in there, and that was just amazing.
Yeah, I think she's a devotee of the internet stuff as well. I think for everybody of your generation, it's become the way of communicating with people. And I don't need to be part of it, because I think that so much of the value of it is actually the person-to-person communication among the people who are affected with the condition, and that it's always interesting to watch how that works. So remember, we had, after the collaborative meeting, we had a family gathering, and it was really interesting, because here were members of 20 families or so, most of whom had never met anybody outside their own family, or in the cases where they were the only person, other people who had this. And we started off, and we were planning to start the meeting about 9 o'clock, and people were sort of continuing to wander in. And within about 5 to 10 minutes, the room was just alive, and it was buzzing away and everything. And then we had a couple of scientific talks, and I think it was you that stood up and said, enough of this science stuff, we need to talk. And that it again, you just watched, and people, drew everybody out, and there were family members there who had lost their son, there were people who were affected, there were people who were relatively newly diagnosed. There were people who, had long-term jobs that, they were in their 40s, 50s were there, and so for people being able to see that whole range of what was going on, and I think it just was astonishing, and I think that you don't see that in many other communities, and this is a community that's vibrant, and it's striking, and there are a lot of very smart people and very connected people in this group, and they take advantage of this. Not everybody does it, but having it available is really, I think, an amazing resource in the community.
I had one of those moments last night when we were upstairs in the executive lounge or whatever it was. It was a meeting for people with vEDS, and I remember I stopped for a minute to get like a piece of fudge or something like that. And then I turned around and I was like, I didn't insert myself in any conversations. I just kind of stood there looking around at everybody, and it's just so heartwarming to see. Like, you do hear, it gets really, really loud.
Yeah.
And you're just like, I love all of these people, and the whole thing is just amazing to watch. Like, everybody get connected. There are people here who I've never met that were newly diagnosed, and there's one girl here who's, I think she's 12, and her whole family is basically here with her, and she's the first one.
Yeah.
And it's just amazing the amount of community, like, before long, everybody's got each other's number, and we're all, you know, it's like we're best friends as soon as we meet, and it's amazing.
Yeah. And I think that, you know, for Kathy last night, who was here and received an award or recognition from the Marfan Foundation because she had been so much of an integrator, and her role was very much like the woman who really brought the Marfan Foundation to the place where it is now. That she had said she knows so many people by voice, by notes, by things like that, sometimes by pictures, but she's met so few of them. And part of it is because there hasn't been a home for meetings for people. And I think that, you know, what's coming out of this collaborative, which is the group that has brought together the smaller, Kathy's group, which is largely the Facebook group, and the groups put together, so the Defy Foundation from the Damacy brothers, and then the Fight EDS group from the Yasek family, and then Annabelle's Challenge is part of it, and the Ehlers-Danlos Society has been part, and the Marfan Foundation has been part. That all of this is providing now what becomes a more natural home for people, and bringing them together. And I think that will be, that this is the lasting benefit of the transition from Kathy's, this electronic network of people that gets together, over by electrons, and then having people get together in person.
It's so exciting. I feel like we're right on the edge of just like it completely bursting, and just so excited for it.
Yeah, I think that I think there's palpable enthusiasm now that, and the transformation. I think that now the development of animal models for vascular Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, the testing for drugs on the basis of understanding molecular pathways that are involved, and the anticipation that we'll be able to start trying some of these medications, seeing how well they work, having more realistic trials of even including drugs like celiprolol, are all things that are coming out of this renewed enthusiasm. And it's bringing new people who have not really been part of the scientific community into it. And I think that it's a transforming time, and we've seen really a dramatic difference over the last few years. I think we'll see a lot of things happen in the next few years.
So exciting.
Yeah, I think it really is. I mean, it's exciting for you because you're looking at what's going to make a difference for me, and it's exciting for me because I think it's sort of seeing the application of what we know about the biology into looking at ways of making differences for people. That's just that's the other part. I had started off, as I said before, very much in trying to understand what was happening, and knew that I was not going to be very good at trying to figure out how to fix it, but that there are other people for whom that's really their passion, and we're seeing that happening.
And now everybody's coming together.
Yeah.
So exciting.
Yeah, it is. It really is. It's a remarkable time now for the group.
Well, is there anything else that you want to mention or talk about?
Well, so as part of the collaborative, we're doing the natural history study, which is trying to get a much better idea of what happens. We have two large studies that have been done, one by the French group and one by us, that have used different ways of looking at what people can expect. This is one where we can take advantage of now the electronic ability to put records in one place and really begin to look very carefully at what's been happening with people, get a much more detailed idea, including people's own stories, so that people can provide their own narrative of their lives and what's happened, which is a very important part because people see things in themselves that physicians don't always ask about. And to try and capture that's really very important. So that's part of the natural history study that's part of the collaborative, and you can find that online and participate. That's collaborative, right? And so it's vEDS collaborative. I think it's not case sensitive. Nope. .org, and it gets you into how the natural history study is working, how everybody can contribute to it, and get medical records. We're hoping to get at least 1,000 people involved, and we have a database that's got about 1,500 people in it that we're trying to figure out how to transfer into this database as well.
How many people in the U.S. do you think have vEDS?
I think that there are probably about 5,000 people.
Okay.
Maybe more. I think that the frequency, we see the more severely affected end of the spectrum, and so and it's a very diverse condition. If you look at mutations in type 3 collagen, there are people who you can spot instantly when you're walking down the street. That's always embarrassing, but walk in the door, and we refer to some people as having a walk-in-the-door diagnosis, something we have to teach our fellows, our trainees, how to look and what to see. And then others who, even with a mutation in my hand, I would not be able, just on the basis of clinical findings alone and examination, be able to make a clear diagnosis. And that depends then on family history and their own personal history of what's happened to get to that point. So there are a lot of people that we miss because it doesn't get, that translation doesn't get turned into
the initial picture.
Right, and the pictures that people see are the really outliers on the much more severe end. And seeing people who look like everybody else is always startling when they come with the diagnosis. But it's so there are a lot of people we haven't counted in this, and we know, for example, that about 3 to 4% of people in whom we've identified mutations have what we call null copies of the gene. That is, one copy of the gene doesn't work, and they have a much milder presentation. When we look at osteogenesis imperfecta, for example, the mild form of that, which also involves the inactivation of one copy of the gene, for mutations in that gene in people with OI, that class of mutation represents between 35 and 40% of all the people with mutations.
Okay.
So we're missing that whole set of people with vascular EDS or with mutations in type 3 collagen genes. And we expect to find them. And then if we look at the proportion of even more other mutations which affect the structure of the protein, there's classes of mutations which are way underrepresented compared to what we would expect.
So there might be more.
So there are many more out there. And those involve more subtle changes in protein structure. So they have much less in the way of presentation.
So it would be nice if we had like 5,000 people end up in this natural history study.
I don't think we'll get there that quickly.
Not that quickly, but I mean in the long term it would be wonderful to, because it feels to me like we've got a great community of people online, and several hundred people, but nowhere near the 1,500.
Right.
Nowhere near 2,000 even. So
Right.
it's hard. It's you know that there's people out there that still need the community, or are maybe living and have no idea that this community is even out here.
Right.
And like always struggling with like, how do I reach those people? I look on my YouTube channel and I can see like where people have watched my videos from, and it's like a lot of the middle parts of the United States are just like
are barren.
Like I met somebody though from Idaho. No, it wasn't Idaho. They were from one of the I states, but it's not common. Like usually I meet somebody from Washington or California or like Baltimore. They're near major areas. So like that there are people living in those more rural areas that have no idea and are not connected, and it's like, how do we reach those people and really get them in? But it's been amazing. Like I'm just hoping that as now we have more of a home to meet and get together and do more things, that gradually it'll just happen. People will Google vEDS and actually come across events, meeting,
collaborative, and all the other kinds of things.
Collaborative. It's very exciting. So.
And one of the ways that for a long time, I think we were probably the major laboratory in the country that would identify people, but a number of other laboratories now do the testing, including Invitae and GeneDx, and Connected Tissue Gene Test has done it for a long time. And so one of the ways that we have of finding people that we haven't found, although sometimes families have one leg in our lab and one leg in somebody else's lab, or maybe it's the arm, the biopsies are different, but we are in contact with them, trying to get them to approach the people they've identified and have them contact us for the collaborative and for the natural history study. So I think that will also be, I think we will find perhaps half as many people again out there who've had confirmatory testing, and be able to bring them into the community, and they will then bring their families. And I think that will get us more. But it still is a matter of recognition, and somebody has to think about the diagnosis in order to do the testing.
Yeah.
And that's the next step, or a next step.
It's one of the next steps.
Yeah.
I would really like to see like all of the emergency rooms just really and primary care physicians. Like I don't know how many times throughout my life I came. Like, why can't you see all my veins? I have too much iron in my blood? No, it's not a thing. There's so many little things that if the primary care physicians were more educated on what it looks like, or, even not even looks like, but if you're having complications and you don't look like somebody that meets like the initial clinical picture, recognizing that.
Yeah, one of the places that we know is starting early is one of the major manifestations that people present with is unexplained bruising. And so the traditional pathway in pediatrics would be the person sees the family sees a hematologist, they do the typical studies for bruising, and they measure platelets and they measure clotting factors, and then they stop. And they say, well, maybe you have a form of Willebrand's disease that we just can't capture, or you just have something. But there's not yet the routine of going from that failed diagnostic pathway to the next one, which is a genetic test.
Yeah.
And we have people now that are beginning to work in the hematology community, in the pediatric hematology community, that are saying, this is the next way to go, and to include that in the ordinary workup for undiagnosed bruising that in people and kids that don't have other dramatic findings. So I think that will be another way of getting into the community. And this is so we can get there before there are dramatic events that occur. But that again is a matter of the hematologists have not been part of this community. up until now.
that's
And we're beginning to see them come in. So, in pediatric hematology.
great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you again for doing this at 6:30 in the morning.
You're very welcome. Well, we've succeeded in taking, quite a long time to get there. That's great. Thanks. Thank you for doing all of this, because, your voice and your presence in the community has really made a big difference for people. And they have someplace to go, and they see somebody who is making a difference. And I think that's inspired other people to do the same sorts of things and to become part of things. And you've had touchstones in the community for people, or touch people, or however we say it, but people who've been very important to you. And I think that what you've done is to spread that and to make it possible for you've become another one of the touchstone people in the community, and both through the podcast, but also through your videos and things of that sort that really get people aware of what's happening, allow them to think about themselves, and allow them to see, somebody who is a vibrant, active person and is, and talks about, the anxieties, the fears, the successes, and that, these are success stories. And I think that makes a big difference. And having that come into the community is really a very, very important thing. And it's, it augments the kinds of things that Kathy's doing. It augments the kinds of things that we're doing at the more professional levels. And I think it's, these are the things that make a difference.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, I'm going to go cry now.
All right.
Thank you, everybody, for listening. This was Staying Connected, and this was Katie interviewing Dr. Peter Byers, who is amazing and agreed to do this at 6:30 in the morning. Stay tuned for more episodes. This one was a special episode. I have episodes coming out on the last Sunday of every month, so if you haven't subscribed yet, go ahead and hit your subscribe button, or just pay attention to the website when it comes out and share it with people so we can raise awareness. Thank you, and I'll talk to you soon.